Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you're enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you would like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have two tiers of support, $3 per month and $7 per month. So again, our Patreon page is patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. In today's episode, we are going to talk about two of the all-time greats in the sport, who both recently announced their retirement. And those are Serena Williams and Roger Federer. And with Serena, as we talked about a little bit in our US Open recap, she announced that she was planning to retire, but didn't exactly use those words in a Vogue article, and sort of had a bit of a farewell tour leading up to the US Open, and then at the US Open played a couple of great matches, including beating the number 2 seed, and then eventually losing in the third round. And Roger Federer, very recently, we're recording this on September 20th, and he very recently, just a few days ago, actually announced that he was going to retire at the upcoming Laver Cup, which will be this weekend. That would be his final professional event. Now, I imagine with both of them, we won't. This won't be the end of them. We'll still be seeing them maybe at exhibitions and commentary, or perhaps coaching down the road. So definitely not the end. But for this episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about each of their careers and legacies, and also from a sports psychology perspective, from a mental toughness, mental perspective. We're going to talk about a couple of matches in particular that stand out to us, where each of them really exemplified mental toughness and some of these qualities that help them become such great champions of the sport.
Yeah, and I think we've both picked out some matches. I think we've got some common ones that we can go through. I think we'll begin with Serena, and I know really the first match I remember, Josh. You probably don't remember. You're a little too young, but it is Serena's first Grand Slam title or major title, which was the 1999 U.S. Open, playing another teenager, Martina Hingis. And times were a little bit different, I guess, in the 90s. We had more kind of teenage players throughout, I guess, even really starting with Steffi Graf in the 80s, then Monica Seles, Jennifer Capriati, Hingis, and then Serena kind of ending the decade. So it was more common to see these younger players playing against each other. And Serena actually had to overcome quite a brutal draw that year just to even get to the final. So she had to play Kim Clijsters, Conchita Martinez, Monica Seles, and Lindsay Davenport. 4 Hall of Famers just to get to the final and then play against Hingis. And she ended up winning that day in straight sets. And the thing I remember about the match, Josh, I guess a couple things. From a sports site perspective, she almost seemed like so young, not even realizing what she was doing or accomplishing. She was just out there playing and having fun and doing her thing. And so that was really cool to see, and that she had this self-belief that she could do it. I mean, to beat those players on the way to the final, and the final did not appear to get to her at all. And so she played great. And to me, the reaction that she had at the end, if you look at it on YouTube, it's just this giant, huge smile and almost like this look of disbelief of like, what have I just done? And everybody thought, Venus was going to become the first Williams sister to win a title. It ended up being Serena in this particular tournament. Obviously, Venus went on to win Grand Slam titles or major titles after that, but Serena got the first one. So that's the one that really sticks out in my mind first, Josh. It's just almost this precocious youngster, not even sure what she's doing, perhaps, but she's just out there playing and playing, and she has the tools to beat multiple Hall of Famers in 1 2 week draw, and so it was great to see. It was a fresh face. Richard Williams had been talking about how Serena was probably going to be the better of the two. And I think in general, the tennis world hadn't seen that yet. Maybe there was some skepticism or we didn't think it would emerge that early. But it did. And Richard Williams turned out to be rather prophetic in that. Of course, Venus Williams, we don't want to detract from her accomplishments. Great player. Um, when she retires, because I think she's still playing more so than her sister. She's a surefire Hall of Famer as well for what she has accomplished. And the two sisters are, I think they're linked very much so in terms of their careers. So that's the first one that stands out for me, Josh.
Yeah, and definitely that is before my time in terms of before I certainly became a tennis fan and started following the sport. But no, I think her rise and really the rise of both of them, which I have actually learned about more recently, just through King Richard, the movie. Which if you haven't seen it, definitely worth seeing in terms of learning more about them and their history from coming from Compton, right, where tennis traditionally has been more of a upper class sport, more of a white sport. So for two black girls to come from Compton, which is a place that's um, certainly quite poor and can be quite dangerous. And to come from that sort of an upbringing to the highest levels of a sport like tennis is really remarkable. So I think that's worth noting, and just the fact that they made that rise to the top of the game from that sort of an upbringing. But also, what they had to deal with along the way in terms of, people maybe not believing in them or criticizing them for the way they played or the way they acted and that sort of thing, and maybe racial undertones or racist moments along the way. So I think the resilience of both of them to get to this point, to have the type of careers that they had, considering those circumstances, is really remarkable. And also for both of them to play into their 40s, as we mentioned, Serena just retired, even though she doesn't maybe quite like that word. So who knows? Perhaps we'll see her back at some point. Wouldn't shock me, but Venus has not quite retired yet and is 42. So is still playing, not at the top of her game, but still playing at a high level. When it comes to Serena, when we start to think about her career, for me, it's definitely some of the so some of her maybe matches over the last decade or so. For one, winning the Australian Open while pregnant is certainly a huge feat. And I think two other matches that stand out to me as we're starting to think about this topic a little bit, and actually both took place versus Victoria Azarenka, and both were pretty significant comebacks. The first was the 2010 Australian Open quarterfinals, where she was actually down 6-4, 4-0. And I guess the question I would ask everybody, whoever's listening, is, if people play at the club level or play, USTA adult tournaments or junior tournaments, how would you respond if you were down 6-4, 4-0 in a match, right? Of course, this is a Grand Slam quarterfinal, so maybe the stakes are a little bit different. But how would you respond? What would your mindset look like? What would your self talk look like? Would your self belief be there at 6-4, 4-0 down? I would say for the vast majority of people, it's pretty tough to to come back and to mentally be there in that sort of a moment. But she came back and ended up winning that match in 3 sets. And the other match that I wanted to bring up was the 2012 U.S. Open final, again against Azarenka, where she was down 5-3, 5-3 in the third set. And again, came back. I believe she won at 7-5 and was able to turn it around. Again, especially considering that sort of a moment in a Grand Slam final with your back to the wall, down a break. Um, you know, how can somebody have that sort of a belief to be able to keep fighting, to be able to play one point at a time and keep yourself in it and give yourself a chance? And I think, throughout her career, and I think especially for maybe a period of time, she was very tough to put away, very tough to finish off, you know, and uh, and I think that shows it. I mean, we can also talk about her her record and both in singles and doubles Grand Slam finals, which I think is remarkable for a number of reasons, and we can also compare that to other top champions. But when it comes to specific matches, those are a couple that stand out to me.
Well, I think with respect to the 6-4-4-0 comeback, I think you asked some very interesting questions. It's the rare person who's going to come back from that. I think it's someone who has to have, as you mentioned, Josh, a really strong self belief. There's got to be a lot of desire there. There has to be a real connection to your purpose as a player and being a professional. Um, and so that's a great moment for Serena in terms of changing something, becoming more focused, and also highlights the difficulty of closing and finishing people. As you mentioned, there was a period of time there. I think this is a theme with both Serena and Roger Federer. The idea of they both had a lot of locker room power, meaning they had this aura about them, maybe for different things, but that doesn't matter. I think one aura that Serena had for a period of years was no lead was really ever safe. And these two matches show that. And I feel like even through the television screen, I could feel that. I could feel like, it's not over. He's done this before. You really had to finish her off, and that's the difficulty on the other side of the net is that's not easy. We've talked about that. It's really hard to finish matches, and it's especially hard to finish off great competitors who don't give it to you, who don't lose it for you. They make you earn it. And when they make you earn it, that can create all kinds of problems for you as the player trying to close out that great champion. And so I think, yeah, there was those years where Serena, no matter what the score was, you was like, I think she's not out of this. She can definitely come back. She's done it before. Um, she starts to sort of raise the volume level of her grunts. The shots go a little bit harder. Then the other player gets a little bit more tentative, right? And that dynamic ends up creating this big comeback and very dramatic moment. So I think she was exceptionally good at that, and that was part of the fun of watching her matches is knowing that she was never ever going to go through the motions at 6-4-4-0. There's just that unbelievable level of fight there that is extraordinary, extra special, because most people at 6-4-4-0 are probably just coasting to the end and just trying to more or less get through those last two games. They may continue to fight, but not at an extreme level. And they probably lose 4-0, or they lose 4-1. Maybe they hold serve or something. It's the special players, the special competitors, the special champions that are able to narrow things down in that moment and just keep fighting. Whether it's 1 point at a time, or let me just play one good game right here. Okay, we played one good game. Let's play another good game. And I think that she was extremely good at that. And like I said, you could feel that through the television screen, that things could be changing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and without that necessary self belief, you don't even give yourself a chance, right? Um, the odds of coming back in that type of situation are stacked against you, regardless of who you are. But when you do have that self belief, when you do continue to fight in that moment, when you don't allow yourself to get negative or smash a racket or yell or swear at yourself or demean yourself or say, "Oh, I guess today's not my day," then you give yourself a chance. Is it a good chance? Not necessarily, but you put yourself in the match at least. I really like to. There's a quote from her that I think is relevant to a lot of what we're talking about. The quote is, "My game is my mental toughness. Just not only to be able to play to win, but to be able to come back when I'm down, both on the court and after tough losses. Just to continue to come back and continue to fight. It's something that takes a lot of tenacity." So here she's talking about being able to come back both on the court, right? If you're down in a match, if something happens, but also after a tough loss, right? We've talked about that a lot on this podcast. Being able to come back after a tough loss, maybe a slump, maybe you lose to a player that you don't think you should have lost to, and that happens to everybody, really. Whether we're talking about the greatest players of all time or we're talking about everybody else, that'll happen, right? You will have those bad losses. You will have those slumps, those players maybe you don't think you should lose to, but it's about being able to come back and keep coming back and have the perspective. And I like, Brian, you often refer to it as a life project, right? Like being able to view tennis in that way. And I think it helps people gain perspective, right? Not viewing each match that you play as so incredibly important and everything rides on this upcoming match. Because that's the type of perspective that adds a lot of pressure. And that's the type of perspective, I think that's almost the default perspective, where a lot of people fall into that trap of thinking each match that they play is everything comes down to this. But if we can keep tennis in our matches in perspective and understand, okay, I'm going to do my best here, but there's going to be another match after this. And I'm going to have more opportunities down the road. And when things don't go well and I lose or I have a tough loss, I need to be able to bounce back because that's resilience. So I like that she broke it down into more short term, in terms of within a match, but also longer term, within a career. And I think we've seen that, right? And from she's certainly had ups and downs. She certainly had tough losses, but she kept coming back. I mean, even at this U.S. Open, right? I don't think a lot of people expected her to take out the number 2 seed, and she managed to after not really having a lot of competitive tennis over the last year, or after her pregnancy, right? I mean, I know she talked about how it was a particularly challenging pregnancy. I think she almost died, and was able to come back and reach the number of Grand Slam finals after that point. Um, so I think her resilience and both in the moment within a match and bigger picture is definitely one of the qualities that helped her have the type of career that she did.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, we may not have seen the last of her. Her level was so good at the U.S. Open this past year that it might be hard to say goodbye after that kind of performance and really creating must-watch matches. Uh, Arthur Ashe Stadium full for all of her matches. I happened to be there one day that she was playing, and just the line to get into the stadium that night was just unbelievably long. Um, Coming from the 7 train all the way to the entrance of the U.S. Open, it's just so many people there, really just to see her. And I like the way you brought out that quote, Josh, and um, I think it's important that we break down what's just going on in a match and what you can control. And she was extremely good at that fight piece and being resilient and not giving up. And like I said, I think that's an extra special quality that she has. Um, are there other matches for her, or the only person I really think of, like when I think of Serena, is her rivalry with Justine Henin, which was intense and was difficult, I think, on both sides of the court. But she, ended up really getting the best of Henin in terms of an overall head-to-head record. She was 8-6, 3-4 in Grand Slams. But I think she won the last Grand Slam matchup at in an Australian Open final. But those were great matches to watch because you also felt the tension between the players, and that Henin didn't, sort of similar to Nadal with Federer, Henin didn't necessarily buy into Serena's locker room power. She was able to bring out her best game, even though she was playing Serena, and then that made Serena respond in a way, right? A challenging opponent. I think Azarenka was similar. I think Azarenka had belief to a point, um, but Henin really had belief when she played Serena. So I think that was an interesting rivalry.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think for me, what I would add is her
Mm,
doubles performance. So, obviously she's known primarily for singles and for all of the Grand Slams that she won. She also did win um, the 2012 singles Olympic title. But I think her doubles record is maybe equally impressive. Winning 14 Grand Slams with her sister, with Venus, winning three Olympic gold medals with Venus. I think the fact that she, was able to really reach the top of both, right? The top of singles, the top of the game in singles, right? Being considered by many to be the greatest of all time, but also to be so dominant in doubles when they decided to play, right? They didn't always play
right.
the Grand Slams, but when they did, they were a force to be reckoned with. And I think that 14-0 record at the in doubles finals in Grand Slam doubles finals really shows that. So I think that's important to think about. I mean, I can't think of. I mean, I guess Venus would be an example, but I can't think of too many other examples of players that really reached the top of the game in singles and doubles. I guess John McEnroe would be a primary example there, but I can't think of too many other examples. So I think we'd be remiss not to mention her doubles dominance as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, how about we move on to Roger Federer? So, when I think about Federer, and I'll pick one match to discuss as well, but if we look at his career, like early on, and really maybe when he really broke out was really 2003, and he started to create this dominance of the sport, and that really grew in 2004 and 2005. And again, when we talk about the concept of locker room power, aside from Nadal, for a few years there, Federer was almost untouchable against the rest of the tour. And he had this aura of every time he stepped on the court, he was going to win. And at the same time, was going to bring this sort of very artistic, balletic performance to the court, which I think was extremely appealing to fans. And, Roger, of course, appeared to be very gracious all the time. Although, to be honest, it's quite easy to be gracious when you're winning nearly all the time. That's not a difficult ask. Um, I think, like a lot of players, a little bit less so when you lose. But I think it was just amazing what he did in that really 2003 to 2010 time frame. Just so dominant in the sport. And then won a Grand Slam title in 2012. And then he didn't win another one until the 2017 Australian Open, which I think it was almost like a rebirth of his game. And I think it was kind of coincidental, although maybe there was some causation here, with Roger having practiced a lot more with a racket head or racket face that was larger. He went from a 90 square inch racket head to a 97 square inch racket head. And he had gotten enough practice time to learn to be really driving his one handed backhand. The whole issue with him versus Nadal had been that Nadal would hammer that side very patiently, until Roger would eventually have just some imprecise slight mishit that would then allow Nadal to attack a ball, maybe either come in or hit an inside out forehand or just do some major damage with the forehand. And that weakness had to be worked on. We've talked about the idea, we had an episode about a strengths based approach. And what we said about strengths and weaknesses is that we want to be maximizing our strengths and managing our weaknesses. And when we say manage the weakness, you have to have your weakness be good enough that it doesn't prevent you from using your strengths, doesn't prevent you from using your weapons. And I think Roger realized that the backhand did need to be better. It was preventing him from imposing his game on Nadal more. And we saw in that match that he was hitting through his backhand much more. I think we also saw that in that Wimbledon semifinal. What year was that, Josh? Maybe 2019? That he beat Nadal. I don't know the year exactly, but he
2019. I remember. I
because
remember
then
where I
he played
was. Yeah.
Djokovic in the final, right? But that was another great match in which I thought the backhand was one of the differences that he was hitting it so well. So I think that was an important thing for Federer to bring his belief back that he could win Grand Slam titles. And if people recall, Nadal won in that Australian Open final. Nadal won the fourth set and then was leading 3-1 in the fifth. And if you had been thinking about the previous years, you would be like, all right, here we go again. Nadal's gonna pull this out like he has been over the last 10 years with Federer. And he had won a lot of 5-set matches, Nadal, previously. And but Federer, to his credit, played great from then on. And again, sort of similar to what I said with Serena winning that first title. When he won that match, it was almost like this, how did I do it? I can't believe I'm back here kind of thing. Right? There was this elation, such emotion. So there had to be, again, a lot of self-belief in that 3-1 down. Because we haven't always seen that from Roger. Sometimes when he's been down, hasn't always been the level of fight that you would see from a Serena or a Novak or a Rafa. But we did see it here. And he was rewarded with a title, and he put himself kind of back on the map after I would say a period of years where Novak was probably the most dominant player. Nadal was sort of up and down with injuries and so forth, and in fact I think Nadal was coming back from an injury even in this event. So that's the match I really think of as almost like the rebirth of Roger Federer, because then he went on to be number one again, and he won a few more major titles to get his total to 20.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think when we think about the Nadal Federer rivalry, certainly a lot of examples where Nadal was able to find and manipulate a weakness. And that was Federer's one-handed backhand, particularly up high, particularly when Nadal was able to use his very heavy topspin and get the ball up high to the one-handed backhand. I personally have a two-handed backhand, but I don't know too many players with one-handed backhands that like the ball up high on that side. It can be very uncomfortable. It's tough to really generate pace the way that maybe you can when the ball is more waist level or lower. And Nadal was able to almost like his game, was designed to find that one particular, weakness or chink in the armor. But over the years, and I think their head-to-head record reflects that Nadal was able to manipulate that weakness. But I'm glad that you brought that up. How the change in racket and going to a larger head size from 90 inches, which is as I'm sure many of our listeners know is quite small. Is pretty much as small as they make rackets these days. I mean, I didn't Sampras play with like an 85 or something like that?
Yeah. So when I was growing up, the wood rackets were 85, and I remember I got it was the head graphite edge when I was in high school, and that was 90 square inches,
Mm,
and that was considered, like a mid-size
interesting.
racket at the time. And then the next biggest one, they hadn't found anything in between, were the Prince rackets, which were 110. There was really nothing else in between quite yet, and maybe Roger was still, I mean, he probably loved that 90, the way the 90 felt.
No, absolutely. And I think, also when we think about his playing style over the years, right? I mean, sort of more of an old school playing style. I mean, if we want to think back to sort of some of his biggest matches, I mean, beating Sampras at Wimbledon, right? And I think back then he was maybe playing more of a serve and volley game than he ended up playing later years, where he sort of became more of an all court type player, where he would come to net a lot. Um, Certainly more than his biggest rivals, Nadal and Djokovic. He would come to net more than them, certainly, and would serve and volley more than them. But he wasn't primarily a serve and volleyer. He would stay back a lot at the baseline. Would really dominate, particularly with his forehand. Um, and yeah, I think going back to this match, that 2017 final, yeah, it was. He was able to step into the court, take that backhand early, rather than maybe being a little bit more passive and slicing the backhand or having to hit it above at shoulder height, or you know in a less comfortable position, allowing Nadal to dominate the point more. So I'm glad that you brought this up. I think another match. Actually, maybe before I get to the other one, I actually have a quote from that 2017 final. And again, you know, I think it's notable because Nadal had been beating Federer at the Grand Slams, and Federer hadn't beaten Nadal at a Grand Slam match since the 2007 Wimbledon final. In his post match interview, Federer said that he was just trying to play the ball and not the opponent. I told myself I just told myself I have to really, really fight. So again, not allowing himself to get psyched out by the opponent, not thinking back to maybe their head-to-head record or recent matches between the two of them, but saying, I need to play the ball. I need to think about how to handle each shot in the best possible way and not focus on the opponent. And it worked. So I think that I'm glad that you brought up that particular match. I think another one, and it took place the following year, the 2018 Australian Open final, which was against Marin Cilic. This ended up being his final Grand Slam title. And you know, after the match, he talked about that he was racked with nerves all day leading up to the final and during the match itself. And so a quote from him is, all day I was thinking, how would I feel if I won it? How would I feel if I lost it? I'm so close, yet so far. I think I was going through the whole match like this. I've had these moments in the past, but maybe never as extreme as tonight. And then they asked him how he felt directly after winning. And he said, I was just really happy, to be honest, that it was all done. I was so bloody nervous all day. It was eating me up inside. That's why when it was all over, I was just so relieved. And I think why I like these quotes is because it shows that these players are human, right? I think we often, the commentators and fans often think of top professional players as somehow somehow not human, or somehow infallible, and that they don't experience nerves, or they don't experience these ups and downs, or they don't ever wake up in the wrong side of the bed not feeling like competing on a given day. But the fact that Federer, in a moment like this, can acknowledge, hey, I was really nervous all day leading up to that match. I was thinking about winning and losing and outcomes and these sorts of things, but he still managed to play and perform and ultimately win that match and win in a 5-set battle against Marin Cilic. So I think it shows that first of all, that these top players are human, and that they have these same sorts of emotions and handle the same sorts of pressure and nerves that every tennis player experiences ultimately, but that he was able to fight through that and win and ultimately win his last major title. So I think that's that was a really impressive victory, especially considering his age. I think right around that time he became the oldest ATP number one in history. So I think it just shows that he was able to fight through whatever sorts of emotions or doubts or nerves he was experiencing in that moment and still able to be successful.
Yeah, I agree with you, Josh, that it's nice to hear those thoughts because, and I think we've heard it from Nadal and Djokovic as well, that they are human. We've seen them be fallible. And it's a matter of that they're not superhuman. Just perhaps they have more experience, more coping resources. They've been in some of these situations more times, um, and therefore they have some things that they can go to. But that was very interesting about how Roger felt throughout that day. Um, the other thing that I think about with Federer is just the way he always imposed his game on the other player. We often talk about using your strengths, using your competitive identity, and the whole idea is to put pressure on the opponent and impose how you play on them. And that is something that he was just brilliant at. He would give you no space. He was aggressive from ball one. Uh, and in fact, most of us, when we think about starting a match, we think about maybe we're working our way into it, finding our rhythm or whatever. And Federer has said that that is not his approach. He comes out aggressive from ball one, and that's his style. And you can see that in the way he plays. And I think when you play someone like that, you almost feel like you don't have any room to breathe. It's so hard. What do I do? And I think that was a big part of his success over the years is just the dedication to that style and of imposing himself. It's um, really impressive how he would stick to that no matter what. And look how much success he had, especially in those years of '03 to like 2012. Unbelievable amount of success there, just going out there and being himself, using that forehand uh, inside out, so aggressive. We often talk about Nadal and how much spin he created, but Roger certainly could create that kind of spin if he wanted to, but his swing path was different, and he had a unique swing path in which he didn't necessarily finish over the shoulder. He would finish really more across his left arm, and but it had so much rotation on the ball that it was able to come in. So just to me, an amazing player, and obviously someone who will miss a ton. I feel like maybe tennis fans will feel a little bit cheated that we don't get some sort of farewell tour, but on the other hand, um, Roger gets to choose how he wants to leave the game, and it makes sense that an event that he is a major part of is the one where he would do that. So um, I think people are probably very much looking forward to seeing that performance. It's going to be quite a strong team that Europe has. I can't see them uh, losing. They haven't lost in this competition yet, so I think they'll maintain their winning streak versus the world team.
I would expect that would be the case, and I think and it's certainly been an interesting event over the years, and I look forward to seeing it in years to come. But yeah, I think the team world is up against it certainly with the whole quote unquote big four playing with Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, and Murray for the first time all playing in this special send off to Roger Federer. And yeah, as you said, Team World hasn't been able to overcome Team Europe quite yet. I don't expect it will be this year, but we'll see. I mean, you know, Francis Tiafoe, who we mentioned, has reached his first Grand Slam final. I know he's on the team. I know, a lot of players from Team World. Maybe they haven't reached the same sort of rankings as as the Team Europe, certainly with all those big four having reached number one in the world, but a lot of players that are maybe in that 10 to 20 range or so, 10 to 25, 10, so let's just say, who have beaten top players. And it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. And yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point that we didn't quite get to see that farewell tour that maybe he would have hoped for. Um, I always sort of expected him to play his for Wimbledon to be his final Grand Slam or his final tournament. Um, but no, I think it'll be interesting to see, for both Serena and for Federer, what happens after after their careers. I would imagine they'll both, have some have maybe play some exhibition matches. Maybe there will be a Federer Nadal match. Again, at some point down the road. I mean, I can think back to, I think it was at Madison Square Garden in New York when Sampras, after his retirement, played Federer, maybe like 5 or so years after. So I could certainly see, you know, both of them continuing to play, continuing to entertain fans around the world. And yes, we certainly have something to look forward to. But no, I think for right now, this is a moment for both of them to really just reflect on their greatness, their dominance. And I think, you know, when it comes to both of them, as you said, Brian, and you were talking about Federer here, but both of them really brought it to their opponent. Neither of them were hanging back, waiting for their opponent to take that first step or be aggressive and counterpunch. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they were both particularly aggressive players who would take the match to their opponent, who would really had a very clearly defined playing style too, right? They both had a very good sense for what they did well, and they used that strength based approach to dominate the match whenever they could. So I think they're both great examples of that, and they'll certainly be missed. I mean, within both the men's and women's tours, there's a lot of great up and coming players. So I think there's certainly players that maybe not maybe won't fill their shoes necessarily. I don't think you can, but are at least coming up in the ranks and certainly entertaining fans and really demonstrating that they have the ability to be at the top of the game. So I think we have a lot to look forward to with tennis. But at the same time, I think this is also a moment to really recognize the greatness of both of these players.
Yeah, and kind of the end of an era, because their careers have certainly overlapped over the years. They've been in the limelight for much of the same period of time, and for sure we'll miss them. I always get a little bit annoyed when reporters are asking players like this, "When are you going to retire? When are you going to retire?" It's like, I don't want these players to retire. I mean, tennis is so good with them around, and of course it'll change. And as you said, Josh, there'll be more players coming up, but it's going to be hard to replace some of the star power of a Serena, a Venus, Roger, and Rafa and Novak are still out there, but it's just been, for those of us who've been watching tennis really from, say, 1995 on, this has been a tremendous era of great tennis with Sampras and Agassi, and then with the Williams sisters, and then Federer, Nadal, Djokovic. It's been amazing. So I think really good discussion for today, and thank you all for listening. If you have any feedback or questions for me and Josh, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. You can also use the Twitter hashtag tennisiq. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. You can also check us out on Instagram. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.